A Sweet Taste of Cake. Chapter 2. Strengths by the Descendant. Being quarry means that you are big and strong and scary when your soul while in this world is to be respected and admired. Being quarry means that you are always accused of being the bully, even when you were the victim. Being quarry means that you were the one that had always got picked for fights, even when you did not want to. Being quarry means growing up mean and angry and having no real choice in the matter. She had considered licking the frosting off the end of his nose. As they held the 2 large pieces of gingerbread, she pondered the white dollop with a smile. She had placed it there as a small joke, a little sign of affection. So, Cupcake realized, it was no surprise that he had not removed it. Together they held the pieces of gingerbread that would make up the roof, leaning across the table to one another. They had tried other ways over the years, but simply trying to adhere to each piece of the frame of the house only resulted in it sliding off. Likewise, leaving it on its side to dry as one piece made it uneven and hard to place. No, this way was fine. They simply held their halves together, as if they were patient, giving, and willing to adjust, then it would come together. Cupcake continued to stare across to her husband as he smiled back at her. She had considered licking the frosting off the end of his nose, but she knew he had left there simply because she was the one who had placed it, and he had let it sit there as a token of her affection. So she left it there, shimmering in the morning light as she looked upon his happy face. As history unfolds, it leaves strings of causality behind it. Things play out one way or the other. All things move on currents that are beyond mortal perception. Things happen in Equestria for a reason. And there, as in any other reality, history simmers and shakes at the tiniest of moments. So, one wonders, what would have happened if they had not met at the gazebo? What if Carrot, who had been nervously walking around the outside of the gazebo, had not turned back and began trotting in the opposite direction? What would have happened if Cupcake had simply walked around and walked outside as well, looking for him but never seeing him? What if she, or he, had given up and simply walked away heartbroken? One shudders to think of the implications. However, for all of the happiness and fear, all of the gladness and sadness that would follow, something made turn around and began to circle backwards along to the gazebo as he began to fuss and worry. It caused him once again to meet nose to nose. As they stood there with their noses pressed together again, as the sound of the band that had occupied the gazebo fell over them lightly, a smile grew on her face as she looked at her nose, looking away with a small blush and then back up to him. As he saw her expression mirrored on his face, she spoke. Hello, Cat," she said with a nervous giggle. "I was going around and around, don't you know?" Yes, me too," he said with a loud laugh. "Good thing I turned around." It was a good thing indeed. Fate had smiled happily as they looked at each other, and soon the welcome feel, the unexpected touch, began to fade. He fetched something from a nearby park bench, and with that, the two went through the village square, leaving the music of the band to float over the cobblestones. As they walked out together down through the trees, Cupcake realized that he had retrieved a picnic basket. As they went, she wondered what pretty scene or scheduled spot he had chosen for the little rendezvous. What beautiful space he would have selected. Her face curled up into an unimpressed smirk as they followed the river to an open space just opposite a familiar structure. "So, we came back to the mill then?" she said while she looked past him to the large brick building beyond. "Yeah, well, I saw this spot here the other day, and," he said as he lowered the blanket over a spot of mown grass beneath a vast sycamore tree. At once, his eyes flashed open, and the look of pride disappeared from his face. "Back to the... Oh, dang it! I just started that look. I mean, if you want to go someplace else," he said, dancing his hose a bit and turning to face her. All at once, he seemed to be at once trying to finish laying the blanket and gather it back up. "I thought that this... Well..." At once, a touch of a hoof brought him back to his attention. "Oh, it's not a bad spot," she said. Let's give it a go. He calmed and looked down to where her hoof touched his. With a smile, they spread the blanket once more. From the basket came their lunch. Oh, Cat, she said as little trays of assorted treats were spread out before her. It all looks so good. Did you make them yourself? Yes, I did. It's my market, he stated, pride filling him as she took her few bites of a pastry. I saw that. It matches your name well. I like baking too, she replied as he poured them both tall glasses of sun tea. I noticed that when I was looking at, when I saw your mark, he spoke as he prepared a glass. It matches your name too. She looked back over her own body, back down to where the 3 cupcakes stood in stark contrast to her coat that shimmered in the spring sunlight. They stood out visibly from the shade of blue that she herself had never really defined, her mark contrasting her tones. Well, I'm quite good at baking if I do say so myself, but it's not the bacon itself that got me the mark, but the celebrations I planned to go with them. Cupcake arched an eyebrow as he looked up to the colt. He continued to pour the tea, even as it spilled over the glass. As he realized that his eyes were still upon her mark, her flank, she gave a little polite cough that brought him just as sorry, he cried, going from a contented sound to one of small panic in one breath. He lifted away the overfilled glass and poured it back into the carafe. As he looked away with a blush on his face, she put her hoof across his mouth to hide her smile. Across her mouth to hide her smile, to conceal her own blush. It would have been unseemly, coming from any other cult, to have them eye her so. Yet his moment of gazing caused her no alarm, as he giggled at how surprised he had been. He just wants to be with me, to talk with me, she whispered under her breath. I'm sorry, did you say something? He asked, sliding the glass across the blanket to her. Oh, nothing too important, she said, taking a small sip. So, she asked, do you enjoy working at the mill? No, not really, he said with a sigh, sitting upon the blanket heavily. Please, don't get me wrong. I appreciate Mr. Ledger giving me a job. Miss Ivory's dad. He's really helped me out. It's hard for those of us who can't get apprenticeships. He's done us all really a favor, all the cults and Billies in there. He nodded towards the mill, looking it over for a long second as he did. But, he said with a sigh, if you can't get an apprentice at something that matches your mark, you can't afford school. Then there's not much other than the mill or the army. And I was too offended, the recruiter said. She looked up at him, saw the disappointment crease across her face. I wish I had your problem, Carrot, she said, offering him some soft reassurance. I've only ever been too round. Carrot smiled. This time he knew exactly what it was that he expected to say. You're not round. He spoke with sincerity. Oh, don't step to me, she called as she turned away with a disapproving glance. She looked up just in time to see all the color drain out of his face. Don't worry about it, she said with a smile, realizing how fair it was. It was a bit of a trick question. With a great sigh of relief, Carrot returned to preparing their little lunch. As he did, he talked about 1,000 tiny things, their purposes, their likes, their wants, their dreams. As they did, gates of knowing opened up between them, strange causality wrapped around the two. She looked up and saw something in his face as he spoke about getting his job at the mill. As Carrot talked, she felt a cart go by on the big wooden white bridge behind him. Saw an old pony with a crumpled hat pulling across the streets, sounded across the boards. She looked back to Carrot, saw the light volley through the sycamore upon him. Carrot stopped speaking, turned her to ask a question. He had been out to evoke the oldest of all equestrian pickup lines. How did you get your mark? When he instead saw the winds run through the tones of her mane, he looked on as her face lifted to his, caught the rose-colored eyes once more. As he drifted in her stare, the cartwheel across the river went around and around with subtlest sounds. He broke the gaze and looked up to the sycamore. Deep inside the tree, something to flit about, and he risked a little call. Cupcake tilted her head as he gave a whistle. To her pleasure, one bird entered his calls, and then another. Soon, 2 sets of chickadees were perched upon the handle of the basket. Together, the ponies dropped crumbs from their lunch that the birds ate with happy sounds, or carried off to the fledglings in their nests beyond, the newborn birds growing strong in the new spring. Soon, other birds joined them. Cupcake and Carrot began tearing off pieces of pastries and throwing them into the ducks that came waddling up to the grassy beach where they sat. Carrot could only smile as Cupcake lifted broken bits of pastry in the hollow between her hooves and leaned forward. Venturesome little brown ducklings soon ate directly from her offered hooves. Their gullets full, the ducks settled into the shade beneath the sycamore as well, dozing quietly beside the ponies. There was a great splash. Carrot and Cupcake looked up to see the vast 2 white birds lift themselves from the mill pond. "Oh, Carrot, look! They're swans!" she called as she sat upright, causing the ducks to come awake and fidget. "Aren't they beautiful?" The 2 trumpeter swans made their way purposely up to where the picnic was set. "And aren't they large?" said Cupcake, wrapping one of her hooves around Carrot's foreleg and leaning into him slightly. Carrot inflated himself and began breaking a croissant in half. As the swan came near, he tossed both halves to the birds. To his surprise, they seemed to eat their halves in seemingly 2 bites, and then began pecking their way through their lunch, as though it had been for their enjoyment. Hey, birds! Called a rather alarmed Carrot as he stood and attempted to gather up his tray of pastries. At once, the male swan hissed at him and bit his hoof. After a surprised yelp passed his lips, Carrot reached in once more to retrieve the quickly disappearing evidence of his craft. This only resulted in him being hissed at once again, and getting his hoof bitten by the swan. Carrot darted in and grabbed up his tray. The great white bird spread its wings and hissed once more. As Carrot attempted to save the pastries, it was all that Cupcake, the ducks, and the chickadees could do to watch without laughing, as the female swan ate her fill, and the male swan chased a rather put-upon-looking carrot cake around the wide circle. The bird kept flapping his wings, hissing at the pony who tried to face it down, and make up a rather fabricated, unopposing threats against it. Every so often he was stopped from the dizziness or general exhaustion. This would only result in the swan biting his flank and sending the pony running once more around in circles. As Cupcake watched, she could not help but smile. Soon she was laughing despite her attempts not to. Laughing so hard that it awoke the duckling that sat on her forelegs. Laughing so hard that the female swan looked up from her feasting with a mental glance. There was a pause. As a hazing Carrot sat in the grass, the male swan grabbed up his pastry and ate it. With that, the 2 swans traded persistence, and now as the male swan ate his fill and beheld the laughing Cupcake, it was the female who bit and hissed at a rather deflated-looking Carrot. Cupcake could not keep herself from laughing, from looking upon the poor pony who slowly circled the scene. Every so often he would look at her, look like he was afraid that she was mocking him. This she was soon to leave the disaster that was unfolding. She tried to show him that she understood, that she did not mean to be laughing, that it was not his fault. He had tried so hard. As he looked back to her with pensive eyes, hers were calm and even understanding as she laughed. Before long, the swans had eaten all they cared to eat, and had settled far away and began to nap. Carrot Cake slowly walked back to the blanket and looked over the ruins of the picnic. An entire night's worth of baking sat ruined, now only fit for the birds. "Miss Cupcake, I'm so sorry. This isn't going so well," he said, shaking the crumbs out of her tray. "I'm sorry." "May I have another glass of tea?" she asked as she slid the glass back over to where he sat, trying her best not to awake the ducklings that slumbered upon her outstretched hooves. He looked down to her glass, and then backed up to her, and once he filled her glass before returning it. To his surprise, she returned the duckling to its mother's side. As the glass of tea sat between them, her hoof sat upon his. I know it's not what you were hoping for," she said as she looked over the desecrated remains of the picnic. "But I do appreciate it. I had enough to eat, and please don't stop trying. I do appreciate it, this day." "Of course, you're welcome. I'm so glad," he said, smiling back down to her. Together they sat wordlessly, drinking their tea and watching the warm spring day play about across the mill pond. Across the way, a small stand of cherry trees was surrendering its pink petals to the ground. As they were tossed upon the small breezes or fluttered across the surface of the water, they swirled around in a wash from the big mill wheel. The wheel carried out its constant rhythm at a perfect cadence, the wet sound seeming almost like a heartbeat. The sound raised Cupcake as he sat there next to him, as the smells of the forest carried up over the water of river, and it reached him with a sweet scent as soon as she felt herself become heavy. As a small piece of ducklings and cascades of warm air drifted around her, she felt her eyes close. And with that, her head lowered upon the living, nearest inviting place. There was a heartbeat nearby, and as it met the turn of the mill, her senses sought it, and soon her head was tucked into the space from which it sounded. Carrot gave a small sound. He looked down as Cupcake's head laid across his forelegs, pressed across his chest. Inside his mind, he sang happily as he soon gave small breaths, and with that, she was asleep across his outstretched legs. The colt thought to think of the right thing to do. He had wanted her to do so much today. So many plans, so many things he wanted to show her. Would it be right to wake her? No, of course not. Not with the small look of contentment that laid on his serene face. Instead, all he could do was look across the body of the lovely mare, ponder the perfect shades of her coat, her mane, how very much like her eyes, her mane and tail were. The tones of rose flowed in and out of each other, playing upon one another in highlights and pale sympathies of a shade so much happier than pink, so much more humble than red. Her coat, he realized, was a shade of blue that one can only speak about in poetry. Words like turquoise, cerulean, these all failed to capture that perfection of the shade. But there was only one word for it, one that came close. Beautiful. She was beautiful. Inside the colt, the words grew, phrases he did not know how to articulate. How to tell her that she was beautiful, but that her beauty alone was not why he felt this way. How to tell her very little of it mattered that she was round. Yes, she was a little round. That he knew was true, but pleasantly so. Pleasantly so. In his head, the only fact that repeated himself was this, that this mare he had wanted to spend time with him, had chosen to give him this chance. How could he not try, no matter how badly he went? Is it okay to tell a mare these things on the first date? The same smells that had drawn her down now reached him as well. Those wonderful scents of spring along the river and pond that spread over them. Suddenly these questions did not matter. Suddenly the feel of her head upon his legs made up his whole world. With that too, he soon lowered his head and placed it gently upon her. The ponies lay there together upon the checkered blanket as light fell softly through the branches of the sycamore, and the soft keenness of the water wheel sounded out in a happy rhythm. Miss Cupcake? Miss Cupcake, said a soft voice. Cupcake raised her head and looked around in a bit of surprise. When she looked at him, insight grew across her face, and she began to apologize. Oh no, Carrot! Did I fall asleep? For how long? She said as she raised her hoof and began to straighten her mane. Oh, not so long. Only about an hour or two. Or 4, he said, trying to keep up a smile. Oh, you're fibbing to me again, she said, looking upon his face as it drew her down in pain. I could tell. I'm sorry. Oh, no, it's okay, really, he stammered, even though his face contorted. It's okay. Why do you look so upset? She asked, her own face sinking. Because my legs are starting to wake up, he answered in a whisper of pain. She pondered this for a moment and looked down to where her head had been resting. As the colt struggled to stand, a pain shot looked through him. She felt herself smiling to him even as he winced. As he wobbled, she began to giggle, offering her own forelegs to help him stand. The remains of the picnic were soon cleared away. Together the two went back up a hill into the city. The day shifted from afternoon to evening as they walked and talked, stopping to look over the stalls of market goods or just observing the ponies as they walked past. Soon their thoughts turned to dinner. The avian befuddled meal beside the river had lost its potency. We could eat the bistro or Trot's Cafe or the restaurant Seabiscuit Hotel or he began rattling off names of places to eat nearby. The Seabiscuit, she said, turning that way, gathering his hoof once more to follow. They have such a lovely crease, you know. He marveled once more at her decisiveness, unless he seemed to know that what he wanted. Dinner progressed well enough, even though the waiter dropping carrots and salad upon the cold's lap made for small discomfort. As the waiter apologized, Carrot helped tidy him up. Cupcake's small laughter leapt around again as he looked at her once more with worried eyes. Yet, kindness sat upon her face. Colt was trying so hard, she knew. Wanted to be special. Just keep trying, she spoke to herself. That's all I ask, is that you keep trying. When they had finished their desserts and headed back out into the city, she saw how quickly time had passed. The fireflies were once more making long, luminescent trails across the scenes, and following them, the two arrived back at the very park where their time together had begun. To their amazement, the band was still playing. The soft sound still drifting around the gazebo was a panorama of stars open overhead and night crept over them. Is there anything I could get you? He asked as they sat together upon the workbench. The shop across the way is still open. I'm pretty sure that you have roasted almonds. Would you like? Carrot felt her lean closer into him as the spring air began to turn chilly. Felt her as for his. Oh, okay, he said with a smile, gathering her hoof beside his, leaning back into her and the slightest as the music still flaring around them. All too soon, it was too dark for the band to read their notes, the small light of the magical lanterns not providing enough to overcome the shroud of darkness. With a sigh, the two lifted themselves from the beds. Carrot grabbed up the hidden picnic basket and laid a few bits across the glass jar that sat before their gazebo. As the band gathered things up, they wished the two good night, and with that, Carrot let Cupcake led him towards what he assumed was her home. Oh, wow! You have such a beautiful house, he said, looking upon the tall, pillar dwelling. One so large it was visible even as he turned down the block. It is not mine. I'm staying with Ivory and family for the moment, spoke Cupcake, her voice falling down into a tremble. Carrot almost tripped over the tone. It was so different from anything he had heard from her. He nearly stopped to ask her if anything was wrong. But at once, he gave a small laugh and pointed to the wide porch as he entered the gates around the house. Look, she said in a tone that was at the same time sarcastic and happy. Mother is waiting up for me. Carrot ran his hoof along through his mane, ran his tongue across his teeth to make sure that none of his dinner clung there in anticipation for meeting her family. Still, even as he readied himself, he wondered why Cupcake's mother would be at Ivory's house. As he got his first look, he realized why Cupcake was still giggling. Ivory herself smiled upon them as he led Cupcake up the steps, the other mare moving aside to make room for them. Oh no, Ive! Did I miss curfew? She asked in a falsely painted tone of worry. Oh, Cubby! She said with a laugh. As the two mares turned back to face Carrot, their expressions fell. As the colt stood there in the porch lights, his smile was small, his unhappiness hidden behind Portly. Carrot, what's wrong? Asked Cupcake, trying over to him. Miss Cupcake? His ears falling back in worry. Now that it's over, I have to ask, despite the swans and the salad and not actually doing all that much, he took a little breath. Miss Cupcake, did you have a good time? May I see you again? He took a much larger breath. I really enjoyed being with you. Did you enjoy spending time with me? I really hope you did. I really hope. Equestrian rubs noses on any number of occasions. It is not simply reserved for those who are growing their relationship. The act occupies a position in which their interactions say many things. An elementary student may rub noses with a favorite teacher on the last day of school. A child might rub noses with a beloved cousin who they have not seen in months. A colt may often rub noses with both of his parents before he leaves for university for the first time, or when all of his things depart home for the first time. It is an appropriate greeting for a pony to give their parents on the occasion of handing them their newborn grandchildren. It is that much more than a hug, much less so than a kiss. So it must be said that one that was offered up at the end of a first date means that things have gone very well indeed by most measurable standards. Yes, it said as Cupcake took a step forward and looked at her nose to his. I did have a good time. I promise I did. Yes, the act spoke as he lowered himself down and slightly into her, began to wall a small warm motion. Yes, please. I do want to see you again. Yes! He called in very current tones as they touched themselves to each other, letting this feeling of contact fly between them for a long moment. I really, really, really like being with you. Ivory looked upon them with a small smile as they lifted up their noses from each other, looked at one another for a long while as they said goodbyes. Carrot? Came Cupcake's voice, lifted into the cool breeze of the spring night. Yes, Cupcake? He answered, teetering slightly on the stairs. Would you please call me Cupcake from now on? She asked as she stood in the doorway. I beg you if you would, Oh, of course, replied the cult, tilting his head to watch her as the door slowly closed. Of course. Good night, Cupcake. Good night, she called back as the thick white door closed behind her. That was too bad, as though the door, she could not see how he had taken a deep breath, how he had gone cantering off through the gardens with the gate with a large dopey smile across his face. Even when he was far beyond the door, he was still running, laughing, calling out joyfully. Out he went, running through the fields beyond the city, dashing among the fireflies that flickered in the lake of his light, passing. She wants to see me again! Woohoo! He called aloud as he ran past the trees behind the old dance hall. His calls immediately stopped and his eyes went wide as he tripped over the many strings of causality that had been built upon this day. This one taking the form of a couple who had been hidden among the tall grasses. As he rubbed his head, he looked back to the scowling stallion and the giggling mare. For a brief moment he could not decide whether to apologize or to ask for relationship advice. Back within the house as the big door came close, and at once an enthusiastic Ivory had spun to entreat upon her dearest prey. For all that display of affection, I can take it that all went well indeed, she began. Soon all she could do was look at Cupcake. The mare stood in the hallway, her hoof lifted to her face, resting upon it slightly as she smiled, and smiled, and smiled, smile. Oh, Cupcake, do stop, giggled Ivory. What, Ive? You're beaming. You're simply radiant, Cuppy, answered the smiling mare as she looked at her hoofs slowly. Gently, she turned Cupcake's face towards the tall hallway mirror. Cupcake looked deep within it, saw her smile wide, and saw in that reflection a look of happiness upon her face that she had never seen before. It seemed to almost encompass all of her. It was almost as though an invisible aurora of contentment had slipped through the entire body. He just wants to be with me, Ive. He doesn't want anything from me, just to be with me. I fell asleep with my head close to his chest. Cupcake stood staring into the mirror, her hoof moving slowly to her nose. Ivory stared on with a wide smile, tilting her head back and forth upon her friend. Oh, Ive! Cupcake finally sighed, her voice at first soft, rolling round with an emotion, then ending with a high tone of realization. I'm falling in love, Ive. I'm falling in love! Ivory lifted Cupcake's chin so that her head rested across her withers. Gathering her friend into a deep hug, she spoke softly, rocking her back and forth. I am so happy for you, Cupcake. Oh, Cuppy, I'm so happy for you. Even as that evening drew to a close for Cupcake and Carrot, the strings of causality upon which they had plucked continued to make their quiet music. In the reaches beyond Ponyville, there sat a little farmhouse. Even as the dark spring of night settled around the house, as the little echoes of insects swept across the farm, a single room within was still illuminated by candlelight. The stallion walked slowly up and down the room. The stallion slowly walked up and down the room, listening with a tired smile as the foal upon his back went on and on about her latest triumph. Those were the biggest balloons yet! They were balloon-tastic! Balloon-perfect! Do you think we can find even bigger balloons next week? How about your buyer paper for presents? Oh, that's right, I found ribbon. I need more ribbon. Yay! How about the other that looks like... At once she stopped. He was almost surprised by her sudden silence as he had been waking her calls. It was that had sent him into her room in alarm. The stallion turned, looked at her with a thankful smile, as a great fast yawn consumed the face of the filly. Here now, time to wed, he said as the filly slowly laid her head against his withers once more. But I want to play my next party, she said blurrily as her mother entered the room on quiet hoofs. Oh, hush, 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 spoke her mother. How can you be so mean to tomorrow? What? Asked the little pony, almost surprised by her mother's question. What do you mean by mean, Mama? Of all the wonderful things tomorrow has planned for you, how could you still be awake? Asked her mother with a small smile. Oh my gosh! Called the little filly, her head wobbling around tiredness. If I don't go to sleep, it can't be tomorrow. It'll be today, kinda. With that, she reached out her foreleg, let her mother lift her tenderly, and with that revelation, the three went up the stairs. Gathered around the room quietly, they did their best to let the other two fillies sleep, as they laid this one into her bed. Maud, meanwhile, on the other hand, was busy tilling the fields, but came by to give little Pinkie Pie her teddy bear. Good night, kiss. Good night, kiss. Oh, how I wish, began the little filly as he tucked her in, his sing-song becoming quieter as he went. Oh, wait, she says, he planted her kisses on her in turn. Kiss and wish they don't rhyme. And with that, the little filly was asleep. As they made their way out of the room, the mayor was surprised that he did not follow her to her bedroom. Instead, he headed down the stairs, and soon the sound of the door opening sounded through the house. Clyde, she asked in a worried tone as he followed, her host silent upon the stairs, going gingerly out into the night air. She found himself not sitting far from the house. The stallion sat there, staring up into the night sky, looking into the panorama of stars that set over the farm. Clyde? She asked again as he sat beside her husband. Dear, are you well? Are you not tired, love? I've been flowing through me enough sugar to keep me awake long into a fortnight, he said with a small laugh. Roxy laid her head on his withers, sighing in sympathy. If it all makes her happy, he said, leaning his head upon hers, I shall have a small party every week for the rest of me days. I shall have paradise until me blood runs frozen and I sweat pulls aside. The two laughed, looking out into the starscape far beyond the rock farm. Oh, Roxy, he said, closing his eyes and drawing her closer to him. She saved us all, made this family happy, with her whole mark. Bless her. Oh, Picamina, said the mayor, drinking in his wharf as the spring chill set in. All sparks and smiles. The girls are so happy now. How much better these weeks have been. Clyde's head fell as once drew him up. What's wrong, love? I have nothing for her, Roxy. I don't have anything except my heart to give her. I know nothing of the world her market's opened up for her. I've only ever been, why, you know that. Clyde swallowed hard, his head falling once again. Inside a moment he felt her host touching beneath his chin, gently lifting his face looking into hers. You've only ever been my stallion, Clyde. You've only ever been the stallion I've ever loved. Whatever the future holds, you'll find a way for her, for all our girls. I know that. I believe that. Yes, her girls. Maud, Pinky, Inky, and Blinky, she said, slowly raising herself to him, rising to lay her cheek to his. He held his mare there, beneath the stars, as he looked across the stretches of field of rock. Soon Clyde closed his eyes, gathered her deeper into himself, and shared his warmth with her. He opened his eyes and looked across the fields. He breathed a gentle invoke. "Oh, Celestia," he whispered, "help me. This isn't to be her world. Help me. Let me find some place for my Pinky. Help me to make her happy." With that, the two stood, she motioning him for him to follow, to make for their room in the bed beyond wherein they would lie in their shared embrace and await for the coming day. He went with her, his hoof in hers, and they made for the door. Yet, even as they went, his ears perked up. Strings of causality flowed from the rock farm, snapping taut to ponies far over the hills in Ponyville. As these connections were made, it seemed to him that a voice carried upon a small breeze, only just audible over the sounds of the insects that chirped happily in the spring night. Clyde shook his head, laughed to himself as he opened the door for his wife. He must have eaten far too many cupcakes, he thought, if he was hearing things on the breeze. Must not make comment about breezies. With that, they disappeared inside, and night finally settled around the little farmhouse. The breeze blew once more, and though there were no ponies to hear that murmur, it seemed to repeat itself. "Fear not. Don't be afraid," it seemed to whisper in the slyest of divine giggles. "I am working upon it. I am working on it indeed." Being quarry means that you learned very quickly that if ponies look upon you, they either feel a smirky superiority or fear. You prefer fear. Being quarry means that they will try to use fancy words to confuse you or to intimidate you into doing things your way, their way. You silence them with acts of savagery and then do things your way. Being quarry means knowing that some ponies will talk down to you like a child. You learned so long ago to answer them with shouts of wrath. Being quarry means knowing all of these things, staying up long into the night wondering if it could be any different.